Welcome to Manresa. There isn't probably any place that is more crucial for the history of Ignatius spirituality than this beautiful and historic town, a few kilometers away from Montserrat and in the very geographical center of Catalonia, the region of Barcelona. The Cathedral of Santa Maria de la Seu, which stands on a rock over the rest of the cities, like an ancient acropolis, is a majestic example of Catalan Gothic. Interestingly enough, the medieval architect that designed it is the same that designed Santa Maria del Mar in Barcelona, where we will find Ignatius in one of the next stops of our pilgrimage. From the garden around the cathedral, we can see the peaks of Montserrat in the horizon, and down here the Cardener River sneaking and curving below us. A medieval bridge still crosses it, leading the visitor who enters the city from the Cardener directly at the base of what today is a huge architectonic complex, which was built around Ignatius' cave. Here Ignatius arrived, you might remember this, has to spend just a few days in the hospice. The reasons for this detour are still unclear and debated. Some argue that he realized he could not reach Rome from Barcelona in time to get the permit that the Pope normally released to the pilgrims who wished to reach the Holy Land every year. Thus, a detour, although the idea of spending just a few days, as he claims to have planned to spend here in Manresa, sounds in contrast with the long-term pause in the permit process. Some others point that in Manresa it was known to reside the Beata, a spiritual woman whom Ignatius was interested to have conversations with. Some others argue that he simply wanted to avoid the royal court which was supposed to be around, and so not to be recognized in these vests of a begging pilgrim. Let us historians try to solve this mystery and focus on Ignatius' experience here. Now, he arrived here once again in a way and left as another person. He arrived after Montserrat charged with the symbolism and style of a radical conversion. One whose main traits remind us of the conversion of St. Francis of Assisi, as in his hagiography, the desire of reaching the Holy Land, in that case through a crusade, a nocturnal series of visions, a process of solitary prayer and contemplation, and finally the dismissal of money and robes to the poor around him. Likewise, Ignatius has left his robes and money behind. When he reaches Manresa, he is dressed like a pilgrim, and endeavors to work on physical details to humble himself. He wants to agere contra, to act against what he thinks to be sinful signs of the fleshy person. So he let his hair grow wild, an hair that in his autobiography he defines and handsomely combed in the fashion of the time, and the same he did with his nails. Kept a strict dietary regime, no concessions to meat or wine. In Manresa, he begged alms every day, looked for spiritual conversations with several persons, and gave himself to the works of charity. No surprise that the sackcloth man, as it was soon nicknamed, attracted the attention of many persons, who began to call him the Holy Man pretty soon. His autobiography tells us a story of spiritual development during a period of time that extended for almost a year. A period that testifies to a movement in his spirit that included dealing with scruples, temptations to go back to his former life, but also with consolation and divine illuminations. In the words of Ignatius himself, God treated him at this time just as a schoolmaster treats a child he is teaching. The pivotal movement in such a process is represented by the Cardener illumination, one that was going to change drastically the form of his initial conversion. Ignatius remembers that one day he was going to a little church that was dedicated to St. Paul in the outskirts of Manresa, and while going there and practicing his regular devotion, he sat down for a little while on a spot close to the river, staring at the flowing waters. In that moment, the eyes of his understanding began to open. He understood and learned many things, both in spiritual matters and matters of faith and scholarship, and this with so great an enlightenment that everything seemed new to him. What did he learn from this mystical experience, and what change did it occur in his vision of spirituality? Let me call Let me quote historian John O'Malley here, a personal mentor of mine as of many other scholars in Jesuit studies. He became convinced that he was being taught by God alone, taught through his experience of joy and sadness, of hope and despair, of desires and revulsion, of enlightenment and confusion. Through all this, God was trying to communicate with him in a personal and direct way so as to guide him in his life and choices. It was on this conviction that the spiritual exercises were based, for this action of God was somehow operative or wanted to be operative in every human life. An important conclusion follows from this premise that had, or at least ought to have had, some importance for the Jesuit tradition of education. That is, it is of the utmost importance for every human being to attain personal inward freedom so as to be able to follow the movements toward light and life that God puts within us, or, if you prefer a less religious formulation, to allow us to live our lives in ways that satisfy the deepest yearning of our hearts. The second conclusion, let me paraphrase here O'Malley again, is that the cardinal illumination and the Manresa period determined Ignatius' reconciliation with the world. He changed from being a disheveled and repulsive-looking hermit or a solitary pilgrim who in prayer and penance endeavored to imitate the example of the saints to someone who loved and saw as a gift of God the things he earlier feared, and vice versa, the excess in penances and contempt of the world as equally sinful as the excess in the worldly life. In sum, put in order in one's spirit and discerning a path between two opposite excesses could help one to find God truly in all things. The first product of this new Ignatius was the spiritual exercises, which I am sure many of you know already. And this new adjustment in the life of Ignatius happened here, close to the Cardinal River, where a cave is venerated still today as to be the place where Ignatius had the illumination and kept coming to take notes in the book that would become famous as the spiritual exercises. Reconciled with world, with a new vision on spiritual life that would eventually lead him toward the university and studies and the help of souls, Ignatius had a pilgrimage still to do. At the beginning of 1523, months since he had reached Manresa, time was come to set out to Barcelona, and from there to Rome, where, as Ignatius remembers in his autobiography, a lady warned him against. "You want to go to Rome? I don't know how those who go there come back." Now, enjoy your week here in Manresa. I will see you next week in Jerusalem, on the other coast of the Mediterranean Sea, the holy city which Ignatius will reach only after an adventurous and dangerous journey from Gaeta to Rome and then from Venice to Cyprus.
A warm greeting to all of our pilgrims. I hope you're enjoying your experience and that you're learning more and more about St. Ignatius of Loyola and the places that he visits as he makes his way to Rome and the beginnings of the Jesuit order. And a very, very warm welcome to all of you to Manresa, a most special place for those of us who are close to the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. As you've learned from Professor Cristiano Casalini, it was in Manresa that Ignatius composes those exercises, and it was in Manresa that on the banks of the Cardinal River, Ignatius experiences a mystical vision where God provided him with so much consolation that, as he says in the autobiography, all of the insights that he had received up until that moment if he were to compile them, they would not add up to what God had provided for him in that moment at the river's edge. And that reminds me to remind you, don't forget to read carefully the excerpts that we're including in the app. We have carefully mined both the autobiography of St. Ignatius and Pedro de Ribadeneira's Life of Ignatius for content that considers each of the places that we will visit on our pilgrimage. This content is updated every single week. Additionally, we have content from the Portal to Jesuit Studies that we've chosen for your daily personal reflection, and that considers both the pilgrimage place and the theme for each week. I hope that you're finding these excerpts to be helpful for your pilgrimage and that you're finding the content to be of interest. Now, I'd like to speak with you for a bit about the theme that accompanies Manresa, and that theme is vision. A Jesuit named William Lynch wrote a very helpful book called Images of Hope, Imagination as Healer of the Hopeless. The book is quite dense, but it contains great insight. Father Lynch's general idea is that we're in trouble when, in the midst of difficulty, we cannot imagine something hopeful. When we're in tough times, images, visions of hope are indicators that the imagination is active and propelling us to endure, to wait, in order to see difficulty through to its end. Lynch writes, "The waiting that we're talking about is positive and creative. It makes real wishing possible. It means the ability to remain fixed upon a goal, to cope with obstacles, to make detours when an immediate path is blocked, to be willing to take all the intermediate means that are essential to the attaining of the goal." Vision provides possible direction as we move forward in life, clinging to the possibility of hope. To not have hope is to choose to get stuck, to absolutize a present difficulty so much that it appears as if it were seemingly permanent, unchanging. The way out of such thinking is to imagine a hopeful possibility. This image of hope will sustain us through difficulty. The reality of difficulty might continue, but what has changed is our thinking about it. In Proverbs chapter 9, we hear, "Where there is no vision, the people perish. They lose restraint. They give up." It would seem then that the opposite is true, that where there is vision, the people flourish. They gain passion. They try. My observation is that people who have vision within their hearts of possibility, of what could happen, it motivates them to do what they can do. In a prayer attributed to Pedro Arrupe, what is named as love might be replaced by vision. I think it gets at this point quite well. What you envision, what seizes your imagination will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning, what you will do with your evenings, how you spend your weekends, what you read, who you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Have vision. Maintain your vision, and it will decide everything. Too often, people focus upon their limitations, their sins, their faults, their mistakes, and the result of this overfocus is stagnation, cynicism, and hopelessness. That fruit makes it quite apparent that such thinking does not come from the good spirit. Quite the contrary. It's coming from the voice of the accuser, and it will bear no fruit that will last. Rather, when we have an uplifting vision of what could be, we discover a lightness of being. As Lynch says, hope and imagination create freedom. Confusion creates traps. Hope and the imagination widen possibility. Confusion shrinks it. Important. For it isn't you and me to make sure that vision becomes enfleshed, that the possible become the reality. Incarnation is God's responsibility. From our end, what we are to do is to maintain the vision, to carry it, and to feed off of it, so that we can do what we can do with zeal, determination, conviction, delight, and satisfaction. After all, who would have ever imagined what could come from a little cave in a little town called Manresa? With God, it seems that all things are possible. Well, we look forward to seeing you next week in Jerusalem.